Hello and welcome to the Cuyamonga Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach, and on behalf of our Board of Directors, our advisors, our volunteers, and supporting members, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Cuyamonga Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. Our focus is reflected in three main areas: experience, education, and exploration. We respect the path of academic balance, the creative pursuit of science, while advancing, conserving, and restoring a direct experience of the deeper human connection to all of life. And as an educational institution, we take an open approach. So we invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration. And that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. On these weekly Sunday discussions, we've had a full spectrum of topics: neuroscience, anthropology, archaeology, astronomy, physiology, mythology, shamanism, art, theater, really pretty much from the arts to the sciences and everything in between. And you're welcome to visit us at our website at cuyamongainstitute.com. And all of these presentations are free. And as a nonprofit, of course, we invite you to become a supporting member. And we want to thank you, the community members who continue supporting the mission of the Cuyamonga Institute. Well, by now we're all familiar with the land bridge idea that connects Siberia to Alaska when the sea levels dropped during the Ice Age. It's long been established as a principal route for connecting to the Americas. When the end of the last ice age melted off and opened up that passage corridor. Well, that land bridge, in light of growing evidence, it's become greater knowledge of this.
It's become much more interesting in light of our
multiple migrations, much earlier dates. Last week when we had our guest James Harrod present his detailed analysis of evidence for the much earlier migrations across that land bridge during the Ice Age.
During the Ice Age, not after the Ice Age when the corridor was free. This is during the Ice Age. This is an exciting new hypothesis.
So working together with today's guests, Michael Gramly, and James, they discovered the first evidence of that Clovis peoples found their way into the Western Hemisphere 15,000 years ago. And they made portable art, sculptures, conducted Mastodon ritual sacrifices, and shaman sled burials at symbolic portals in the lower world. These discoveries provide new reflections on indigenous traditions, and as James pointed out, may very well provide resources for an expanded understanding of their spirituality.
Oh, it was a very exciting presentation that James Harrod made when he looked at the cultural significance of articles that were well known and hidden away in museums and some newly found. Yeah. And this was connecting the North America to this Gravettian globalization. Mm-hmm. So these cultures in Siberia that were part of this vast network of trade and exchange from Europe, all through Europe, these were the Gravettians. And up into Siberia, up into East Asia, up into the Middle East, up into, now they say North America as well is a possible extension of the Gravettian globalization. The Gravettians named for the Gravettian site in France, right? One of the early sites. This was a culture that spanned some 20,000 years. That was part of Europe 30,000 years ago. A vast, dynamic, innovative, enduring culture that lived at the height of the Ice Age in a very difficult terrain. The Siberian sector of this left the mammoth bone huts. They were mammoth hunters. They left a trove of tools and art. We have their portable sculpture. We have a lot of evidence of them. And it's so many similarities to what's going on in Europe and other sites around the globe. So exciting. So what James did was working with his colleague, our guest today, Michael Richard Gramly, was look at these sites, this evidence for the Siberian cultures, what it meant, their cosmology, their tools, their art. He's looking at similarities with these Clovis sites that they've investigated in Kentucky, California, New York, Montana. Clovis sites that involved mastodon burials. And they're finding connections between the two. But you have to ask, well, how could that be? How could these cultures in Siberia cross a land bridge when it was still glaciated during the Ice Age? And the answer is something just extraordinary. Mammoth tusks that look like they were split lengthwise. How do you do that? And that our guest today, anthropologist Michael Gramly, says could have been the rails for sleds. We know that waterways are highways. What about a frozen waterway over the ice? What did the land bridge look like during those early years and during the melt-off? And how did it become a corridor? What's the evidence? Has there been reproductions of these sleds? What do you need with them? Cordage? Well, we know cordage was made early on from a number of materials, animals to plants. I mean, this is so exciting. These were found in bogs, so they were well preserved. They're found with, you split a mastodon tusk, a mammoth tusk, you know that that was man there. So it's quite the story. So while James covered the cultural significance, which was a beautiful unraveling of their cosmology, of their mythologies, of their symbology, which still resonates with us today, the last slide that James showed was of these mammoth tusks and what it looked like. It could have been a series of tusks. And Michael Gramly was in the audience, so we said, oh, come and really elucidate your findings and put it into context for us. How could what an exciting hypothesis. Let's look deeper into this evidence, because this is groundbreaking, and the more we know about our early history, the more we know about ourselves, right? And this resonant culture, and the connection of this one human family that just spread out, but is so deeply connected. And we're also looking at a mother culture, Laurasian, as Michael Witzel would call it, a Harvard mythologist looking at, there's one mother culture connecting us all. Here's how it could have happened. We certainly know that there was DNA evidence connecting Siberia to Alaska to North America. Well, the question is, how early on did that happen, and how many migrations? Just really exciting stuff. So let's look at the evidence, and let's introduce to you Richard Michael Gramly, anthropologist, who's got, such a wide-ranging history. So earned his MA and his PhD in anthropology from Harvard, was a research assistant at the Peabody Museum there, an exhibit planner for the Maine State Museum in Augusta. That's where you're from. I'm going to go look at those. Volunteer for the Peace Corps in Kenya, curator of anthropology for the Buffalo Museum of Science in New York, published troves of articles and books on anthropology and archaeology. And while he has done extensive fieldwork and research of the Paleolithic cultures of the Old World, we want to ask about that, because that gave him a real basis and a visual extensive knowledge to identify the New World artifacts and see if there's cultural connections. Gramly says since 1964, his principal interest has been the peopling of the Americas. So much new data for that, and their cultural connection to the Old World. His fieldwork in the Americas is now focused on this handful of Clovis sites that James identified and decoded in Kentucky, demystified, Kentucky, New York, Montana, and California, and we'll cover those again today. Welcome. I'm going to call you Gramly, like so many of your colleagues do. Welcome, Gramly. So good to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I have to, express my deep appreciation to both of you for hosting me in this session. But I also have to acknowledge my deep appreciation to all the people who helped me excavate. I'm just a single person with limited resources, of course, and yet when I draw upon thousands of people, as I have over the years, I speak with many minds, and I have deep resources, and I'm able to publish routinely books on archaeology. I've had very few grants from the public coffer, if you will. I relied primarily upon private contributions, and that's the way traditionally archaeology was done in North America, and I'm just continuing that skein of behavior.
Well, it's been long acknowledged that the land bridge, when it was deglaciated, was a corridor for the New World. But we're finding so much evidence over the last several decades for multiple migrations. And now, would you consider the Gravettian culture from the Ice Age as just one of the earliest migrations over this land bridge? This is your hypothesis.
Well, I'm a kind of a plodding archaeologist, and I go from what I know for sure backwards in time a little bit. I'm
Where the evidence
very interested.
might lead. Yeah.
I'm very interested when the New World was first entered, but actually, in practical terms, however, I think we all accept Clovis, of course, but I pushed back the threshold slightly, and I realized that we pushed it back far enough in time, and noted the commonalities that we can speak of Upper Paleolithic in the New World. I think we probably ought to stop thinking about or using the terms Paleo-Indian, Paleo-American, and just use what it is, Upper Paleolithic. It's an artificial separation we've had. I especially feel that as an old world trained archaeologist, I see no reason to separate the two continents or worlds, if you will, and the Western Hemisphere, the Eastern Hemisphere, and they were linked initially. People who came into the New World 15, 16,000 years ago, and maybe before, but I'm interested in the 15 to 16,000 year old pulse. They were going ever eastward. They were not aware of this being a separate hemisphere, but they went ever eastward in pursuit of proboscideans. You know, Gravettian.
Okay, proboscideans being the elephant family with the proboscis, the trunk.
Trunked animals, however defined. We're talking in this today, we're speaking of the northern hemisphere. You know, all the proboscideans that were in Eurasia and the New World were killed off. Had these people, the northern cultures, been able to cross the equator and go to the south, probably all the African elephants and the Indian elephants would have been gone as well. But fortunately, they weren't able to bridge that very important gap. You have to adapt to the equatorial climates, but you can move laterally, east to west, very easily, but you can't move very well north to south. That takes a little bit more
There's
doing.
a lot of implications about humans killed off the megafauna in North America, but let's save that for the end, because there's some really interesting implications. We're still causing extinctions today. Perhaps we can learn a vital lesson here. And the reasons why that you present are very interesting.
It's sobering, and I have evidence, in my opinion, at least to my satisfaction, that we're totally responsible for the demise of the proboscideans.
Yeah. So let's get to that in a bit. But tell us about your call to adventure. Why anthropology? What do you most want to answer? What are the burning questions that get you going in the morning every day on this exciting adventure?
Well, you know, it's my adventures in archaeology began at a very early age, and I'm a scientist, and I like making scientific discoveries, and I like following scientific method. Scientific method, I enjoy following scientific method. Scientific method is hypotheses are formulated, and then you test those hypotheses. Either you test them or your friends test them, and then you publish what you discover, your experiments. You publish it in a timely manner. And I've published everything I've ever had my hands on. I'm proud to say that. Beginning at 13 and a half years old when I wrote my first publication. You know, I found that publication, I'd lost it. And I realized that that I'm still the same 13 and a half year old person. I
Yeah.
haven't improved my writing style or my thinking for that matter since I was 13 and a half.
Well, we appreciate the daring scientists that are willing to hypothesize where the evidence leads. And that's how we advance. And it's really exciting to see the cutting edge unfold. So we're going to hear you out today on this
Well,
evidence.
very good. Now, I would like the people who are listening and by way of preparing them for my conclusions at the end, I have to tell you a little bit about myself to realize that some of my conclusions are probably credible because I've been doing this archaeology as a science for an awful long time, at least in human terms. So my first momentous personal discovery occurred in 1956, way back then when I was 10 and a half years old. I realized I had found an archaeological site along what must have been an active channel of the Chemung River, but it was now long abandoned. And then and there, because of that discovery of the site, I was fascinated. I'm a romantic, I guess you'd say, and I realized there were other scapes that preceded the current landscape and cultural landscape. So there, I decided to train then and there to become a detective of the past. With a weekly allowance, refunds from bottles, money earned snow shoveling for neighbors, I began to build my library of archaeological publications, mostly site reports. My great aunt Norma helped foster my interest by giving me books about archaeology for birthdays and Christmases. When I was a young teenager, I realized that her husband, my great uncle Mike Johnson, and his brother Milf were descended from New York State Native Americans, Mohawk, Iroquois, in fact, and through my father, I was related to them. My immediate interacting family was small, and learning about our Native American ancestry was a revelation to me. Although in those days, no one could talk about it openly. In those days, the subject was taboo. When I was 12 years old, I began to excavate the Twin Oaks late prehistoric Iroquoian site, which was located a mile from where we lived, and we lived on a farm. Friends of mine helped me dig, but of that group, I was the keenest and gave the most time to the project. Eventually, we made some significant discoveries and learned a great deal. My share of the artifacts and eventually ended up with the local historical society in Elmira, New York, and the New York State Museum. And by the way, I have to say this, it's terribly important to emphasize it now. I've always tried to find homes for the things I've found. I've kept virtually nothing in my life. I've always wanted to see it in a public institution. I summarized our finds in an at Twin Oaks, in an archaeological publication that appeared when I was 14. I shared it with Dr. William Augustus Ritchie, our esteemed state archaeologist at the time. He took the time, believe it or not, to write a return letter, which I treasured for many years. And let's have the first slide. Or if you're the first illustration, can you put that on the screen?
Yeah. Okay.
So the upshot is mothers encourage your kids with their passions early on because it can set them off for a lifetime of adventure and contributions.
We threw this one extra slide in just because we wanted to show the land bridge and people could see the geography of the location.
And you'll notice the Kamchatka Peninsula, genetically, Native Americans share some genetic material with the people of that region of Eurasia. Well, here's a newspaper article in the Elmira Star-Gazette. Shows me when I'm 17 with artifacts I gave to my local historical society. I had published I've been interested in archaeology for several years prior to this, but I have I'm shown holding in this poor photograph of a huge pottery vessel that I had unearthed personally at the Twin Oaks site. In any case, Dr. Ritchie gave me advice that archaeology was properly, and we can take that slide away. I followed Dr. Ritchie's advice that archaeology was properly a course of graduate study. He advised that for my undergraduate degree, I major in geology, biology, or mathematics, all fields providing necessary skills to a budding archaeologist. Even becoming an English major was desirable in Dr. Ritchie's opinion, as a professional archaeologist would be expected to author many essays for scientific journals and the site reports. Therefore, I entered Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where I majored in geology.
Mm-hmm.
During RPI freshman week, I took the bus to the New York State Museum in Albany and visited Dr. Ritchie. And I remember my heart was in my mouth. I can still remember that day when I knocked on the door and was admitted finally to the archaeology offices and laboratory. Finally meeting Dr. Ritchie in person and his assistant, Dr. Robert E. Funk, who was to become the state archaeologist after Dr. Ritchie retired.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Funk would become a mentor and a dear friend, and he who gave me my first paid job in archaeology.
Fabulous.
It's good to network early on. Yeah.
Yes, and right. Through Doctors Ritchie and Funk, I met R. Arthur Johnson, an amateur archaeologist and doubtless a distant relative of my great uncle, Mike Johnson. Late during September 1964, I rode with Art Johnson to an early American site located south of Albany, which he had found. It was in the Hudson River Valley. It had been named the West Athens Hill site. It was there that I found, lying upon the surface of the ground, my first Clovis flakestone artifacts. Boy, did that have an effect on me. Here they were so well shaped and so very, very old, I was told. Then and there, I was committed to study New World archaeological cultures of the greatest antiquity. This personal quest for their vestiges still burns brightly these 59 years later.
Yeah.
In spring 1966, I guided a friend, John Forstenser, to the West Athens Hill site. While John busied himself picking up artifacts from the surface made of beautiful green Norman scale chert, I systematically explored the hilltop and was rewarded by observing there were still promising places to investigate. From a small test hole, I was amazed to recover 2 Clovis points. These are very rare, by the way, and other stone artifacts of similar antiquity. It gave me great pleasure the very next week to present those to the New York State Museum, because I had made a very important find. That summer, I was given my first paying job as an archaeologist with the New York State Museum. It was a dream come true for me. The dig at West Athens Hill site was my first professional excavation. So my first professional dig was on a paleo site.
Yeah.
Many discoveries and scientific publications resulted from seasons of field work at West Athens Hill. And let's look at the next illustration.
Okay. And while I pull that up, I'll mention Tony asked the question, could you expand on why north-south is so much more difficult?
For early people to go. I mean, it seems like you'd want to go to warmer weather.
Yes, but when you're adjusted to cold weather and the animals of that climate, when you go to the south, to the equatorial areas, you will find a new suite of animals. And of course, you have to clothe yourself differently, make different tools even, and it's a radical change in your lifestyle. So radical that it's not done very often, at least in prehistory.
Okay.
Cultures move from east to west very easily. Western Europe is in close contact, if you will, with easternmost Eurasia. But peoples of the equator, not necessarily so easily in contact with the people of the
They
far
were
north.
also concerned with preserving their culture and their ancestral knowledge, right? You had to have a good reason to change and innovate,
Yeah, yeah.
I think.
Exactly. People are innately conservative. Uh, they will change their culture through time, but they don't like radical changes. No one does. And uh, in any case, this particular publication that we see on the screen now emanated in part from the work at West Athens Hill. There's a chapter in this book, which came out in 1973, devoted to the West Athens Hill site. And you can see the names of Dr. William A. Augustus Ritchie and Robert E. Funk. They were, Bob was a mentor of mine. And this publication is something of a landmark. It's a very rare book these days. You could buy it for $6 back years ago, but boy, try to buy it for $6 now. That's all I'm going to say. So at West Athens Hill was born my intimate familiarity with stone artifacts of the Clovis era. However, many more years working with New and Old World lithic assemblages were required before I became totally adept in the study of Paleo-American stone tools, as well as conversant with other scientists who also specialized in their study. Although I was admitted as a graduate student in the Department of Anthropology at Harvard University with the expectation I would write a PhD dissertation on New World archaeology, instead, to the consternation of my mentor, Professor Steve Williams, I began to do research in East Africa and wrote a dissertation on aspects of Upper Paleolithic archaeology. In Kenya and Tanzania, I got to see many thousands of flake stone tools and fossil remains for the better part of 6 years. Privately, I was steeping myself in Old World prehistory with the intention of, once again, returning, focusing upon the cultures of the New World. But now I would have an unique, improved perspective that only hands-on experience can give you. I didn't get this out of books merely. I got it by finding stone tools in the old world and handling them. I visited many sites in France, elsewhere, but I did my field work and writing, if you will, on Eastern Africa, cultures of Eastern Africa. And
And you
I
say
course,
that's why your European colleagues are really keenly supportive of this Gravettian globalization
I can
and
speak
this,
their language.
yeah,
That's correct. And I am a
you're
fellow of the
familiar.
Royal Anthropological Institute because I've published a lot of stuff on some of the fossil remains I found, human fossil remains. So I've walked the walk, I guess, and they listen to me when I talk the talk. Let's face it, you have to build credibility, and it takes years, and it takes some hard work and sweat. You can't just build credibility. I can't write today for some journal without some experience in getting and I can't write convincingly. Let's put it that way. A few years after my return from East Africa and the completion of PhD studies, I discovered the state of Maine's first habitation site of the Clovis people, the Vale site in Oxford County. I well remember a visit to Steve Williams in his office at the Peabody Museum not long after the Vale site's discovery to show him a pocket full of Clovis points and other tools. I was itching to investigate that site. Afterwards, I authored a report that proved to be very popular. We sold many thousands of copies. Later, Steve told me that I had redeemed myself by authoring that report. I was shocked to learn that I had ever been in his bad graces. Happily, I restored his faith in me and could make him proud that I was his student.
Yeah.
Until he died in retirement in Santa Fe, out your way, I kept Steve Williams abreast of my various investigations of Paleo-American sites across North America and shared the insights that those discoveries provided. Let's look at the next illustration.
Okay.
I don't have a copy of the the original book. In fact, I gave my last copy away that I sold 3,000 copies of. But here's this more modern publication, came out in 2009, shows a Clovis point and a caribou and the Aziscahas Mountain behind, which is near the Vale site and can be seen. But the first, when you open the book, and the next illustration shows here, this site is famous and always will be famous for our discovery of the habitation site, and 600 feet to the west and upwind, we found the places they killed caribou. And some of the spear points, the fragments, the tip fragments that we found at the kill site fitted bases that we unearthed at the habitation site. And I managed to fit 7 points together in this manner. And I was able to prove, because of it, that all 6 tent sites were occupied upon every occasion. This site was occupied over a period of 9 to 10 years. These people succeeded in killing off the valley caribou herd, and they had to abandon this site and live elsewhere. But in any case, discovery after discovery of important Clovis sites followed after I received a PhD in anthropology in 1975. I investigated sites of more recent vintage too, and authored the expected site reports. But my intellectual compass did not falter, and eventually I became known as a leading expert in the subject of the peopling of the New World. But my knowledge and that of my colleagues was based primarily upon stone tools. And although there had been some thought-provoking discoveries, such as the Anzac cache described to us last week by Dr. James Harrod, and the Ritchie Clovis cache in Washington State, in which I had a hand. And let's look at that next illustration. The audience should see this, because here's the cover of a reprint of the book. These huge Clovis points were found at this site. It got national press, was in National Geographic magazine, became a controversial site. And I've dug up some of these most wonderful creations. This point, which is the largest Clovis point ever found in the ground, I took out of the ground myself. There are both sides of it shown. You can't see from this photograph, of course, but you have to have a drawing to see it. This was so masterfully made. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful.
How large?
Point. It's 9¼ inches long.
Wow.
They don't get much bigger, but on the other hand, they do. The biggest point is 11 inches long, but these were routine things. People, their size was so impressive that people thought they were ritual items, but they weren't. They weren't ritual. They were normal, everyday tools used by these people. They killed bison antiquus, a very large animal. There was blood of bison antiquus on this point. They needed such large knives to do the job. You know, Clovis
And they were
point,
expert flint knappers.
well, they were. They were. That's made from agate, of course, which we know where that outcropped. But actually, you don't need a spear point any longer than 6 inches, if you know where to put it, to kill any animal that ever walked the earth. Those 9-inch points were big knives. We had some of the regular usable points for killing. I mean, none of them were longer than 6 inches. So it's skill, in addition to the tool, is necessary to make these weapons effective. That's kind of what we've learned. But anyways, I have to reemphasize that our knowledge up to that time was focused upon flakestone tools. And there's just only so much blood you can wring out of a piece of stone. So I became a little jaded, I guess I'd have to say. Same old, same old. I could find these early lithic sites almost any day. If I wanted, I could find another one, but it had become boring, I have to say, to me as an anthropologist, because I was hunger. I hungered for learning about the people,
Yeah.
their religion, their all the aspects of what it meant to be an early hunter. And
Right.
stone tools can only tell you so much. You understand?
How can we
Um,
only know about stone tools of Clovis? We don't really see any other
in
artifacts,
fact,
but they're there.
the word Clovis is named after Clovis, New Mexico, where these characteristic fluted spear points had been found.
Right.
And for some people, that's all they think you have when you go to a Clovis site. But I was told that. I began to believe that myself in my heart of hearts. But I knew that I was told that repeatedly, that I was wasting my time looking for anything else, organic artifacts. But the tide began to turn um, with Professor Tom Dillahay's controversial discovery of the Monteverde site in Chile, his important 1997 report. And let's put that illustration up showing that book.
I think we
There it
interviewed
is.
Virginia Steen McIntyre on that back in
I've read that.
yeah.
That's a huge book. I've read it from cover to cover. Very few people can say that. I paid close attention to it. And Tom Dillahay, I'm proud to say, is a colleague of mine, and I've communicated with him a great deal. But this report, he recovered, he documents the recovery of Clovis artifacts, I mean pre-Clovis artifacts, of wood, bone, ivory, as well as stone.
Mm.
These finds challenge established beliefs based upon stone tools. Then in 2004, a graduate student at the University of Florida, Andy Hemmings by name, submitted his PhD dissertation with the intriguing title, The Organic Clovis, a single continent-wide cultural adaptation.
Yep.
Andy focused upon discoveries of worked proboscidean bone and ivory that had come to light on the bottom of Florida rivers and spring vents. And let's show this report, it's the next illustration, of a
Bruce
rare
Bradley.
book. Yeah, this is a rare book, and you'll see that Andrew Hemmings' name. Three of those scholars, and they're very eminent. Bruce Bradley, he wrote about stone tools. Michael Collins wrote about stone tools. But Andy Hemmings, 1/3 of this book is devoted to bone, antler, and ivory artifacts. And
Mm.
this is an important book. So slowly, the tide was beginning to turn. In any case, so let's go
And one
back.
reason was they were finding Clovis all over North America and
Right.
Central America. I mean, there was widespread.
And just on a side note, we had the great privilege of spending several days with Bruce Bradley, hearing his research. He did do the flip napping for us while we visited him, and just understanding the technology of it, and that how
Watching
the
it.
perfection of how
Yeah.
the process was, and that if something wasn't perfect, they discarded it.
There's no person who can say it better than Bruce
Yeah,
when
we were
it comes
fortunate.
to stone tools.
Yeah.
Honestly, I concede to that fact. But Bruce continues his focus upon stone tools, and I think he will. And it's advisable that he does until the day he can write no more.
Yeah.
But I myself have left stone tools. I mean, and I've gone slanted off into the organic artifacts. The stage was now set. Scholars were primed for any important discovery of Paleo-American organic artifacts that might command their attention. Pioneer thinkers who years before had advocated for archaeological assemblages of bone, antler, and ivory, but were ignored, were at last given the attention they richly deserved. And let's look at the next illustration.
What do you mean by
Because,
organic artifacts, like
well, I
carbon-based, where they
mean,
can be dated? Or
wood,
what does organic applied to this mean?
organic gives you more compass for
Mm.
creativity. That's all I can say.
Okay.
And you can make sculptures and things more easily out of those materials than you can out of stone. But
Tells you more
still,
about
there are
the
stone
culture.
sculptures.
Yeah.
But look
Yeah.
at this, for example. Adrian Hannes had found a site in northern the Dakotas, the Lang-Ferguson site, where he recognized organic tools, choppers and hand axes and other interesting tools made of flaked from bone. And everyone said, oh, yeah, they paid no attention to it. But he was right. He was absolutely right. I've always believed that he was right. And finally, and at long last, his work was given credit. His 1980s work was finally published by a major research outfit. And here it is in this particular monograph. And I was happy. And of course, Adrian Hannes was happy to see that this attention was finally given to him. So but get back to my own particular effort. Let's lead this now. So I just knew that I had to find these sites with organic artifacts. In 2014, I discovered at long last a Clovis age archaeological site in New York State's lower Hudson River Valley that proved to be unique in the annals of New World archaeology. It was a kill site of an Ice Age proboscidean, a mastodon, 13,000 years old, well dated. This find had been a simple kill site, it might have been regionally important, but it would not have been regarded as anything earth-shattering from the perspective of the overall archaeological record of the New World. What made this 13,000 calendar years old site so interesting, however, was the evidence that Clovis rituals had taken place there upon a mastodon's carcass. It was as if we had chanced upon a religious edifice or chapel where ancient services had been conducted. You know, you realize that the carcass of the proboscidean is it's the place they venerate. That's the most important
Sacred animals,
place.
so sacred sites.
And where it died, is such places are very rarely found, actually. Nothing like it had ever been recognized in the New World, nor have such places been much found in the Old World. You would think with all the work that's been done in the Old World, they would have they have houses made of mammoth bone, and they have this and that. They have caches of mammoth bone in caves, but actual kill sites where the mammoths actually died? No, there may be a handful. I can count them on the fingers of one hand.
Tell us why it was ritually significant. You said a lot of artifacts piled up on it, and only mastodon.
Yes, and
no other animals.
And that brings up this next topic. What are the neat finds we made at the Bowser Road site? Well, we found out, despite what is showed in National Geographic and every popular book, that these animals were brought down by severing the Achilles tendon.
Yeah.
Ouch.
I had chop marks to the right hind leg, and only the right hind leg, not the left hind leg. So we know, going into the ethnographic literature of Africa, where elephants were killed in similar ways, we know that the axe, a brave person, came up behind an elephant while the elephant's attention was distracted, grabbed the tail with his left hand, hoisted himself up, and swung down with an axe on the exposed Achilles tendon and severed it. And when that happens, the animal can stand, but it can't walk.
Wow.
It collapses if it walks. And now that animal is at your mercy. So that's what happened at Bowser Road.
So you're away from the tusk, you're away from the animal's attention, you sneak up behind it, and you've just downed it.
Yeah.
And
Achilles heel is susceptible even for these animals too.
You have to train to be able to do that. I mean, after all, remember, a bull mastodon weighs up to 10 tons. It can move quickly. I'm sure it could kill you if you didn't know how to do it. So you had to have shaman and people adepts instruct every generation of young people on how to go about it in the right way if you want to live.
And
Okay.
jump away in time, right? So you're not
Right. So,
crushed.
but
Yeah, I just want to mention, it brings up this concept for us to look back with today's perspective and the whole concept of killing animals and that kind of thing, but there's a relationship to life itself that was integrated into these people and how they had a respect. And the kill
Ergo,
was,
the ritual.
yeah, the ritual, because each kill was very specific for a reason for the use of survival.
And
well,
culture. Yeah.
the actual killing of the animal, I mean, to bring it down is one thing, right? By severing the Achilles tendon. And I would argue this took place on the ice, upon the ice, which was near this spring. At that time of the year when people can travel it with sleds and come together, and they all came together to do this killing. This was, and how often they did it, well, we'll talk about that, but it was every 7 to 10 years. Any case, after the kill was made with addles and darts, and we had one of the actual spear points made of bone that was used there, they broke up those tools that they had used in the killing and every other aspect. They had devices for hauling the parts of the body, everything away to the camp and so forth. Everything they used in the kill and the processing of that animal was left on the animal. The addles, and there were 21 of these spear throwers, they were intentionally broken up into fragments and heaped on the anterior backbone. It was remarkable what we were finding. Archaeologists must pay close attention to the context of the finds.
Right.
And I just remember that dig that we had in 2014 with inexpressible fondness, because we were finding these things where the Clovis people had left them.
Okay, so let me just delineate this. So you have a mammoth, you bring it down. Did you find the tool that they would hack the Achilles heel with? Would that be
That was a
special
stone
tool?
axe.
Stone axe? Okay.
Yeah, that
And
was
so,
not left on the animal. No,
all right,
no,
but all the other tools, the atlatls and the other spear points,
made
broken ritually and then gifted back to that animal in a ritual, in a
all
ceremony.
that they ever left on that carcass of that mastodon killed at Bowser Road were pieces of previously killed mastodons. That was a sacred animal, and you put upon that animal only things made of other mastodons. Never a deer bone, never anything of that. You never left anything that would be to profane the animal. Do you understand?
I do.
So they heaped the bone artifacts on the anterior backbone, and then the ivory artifacts that they had, the ivory adze, the ivory adorno that attached in the shape of a mastodon, which attached to the
Which James
atlatl.
described last week and showed us a picture of.
Exactly. Other things were left on the head where the tusks were. They gathered some of the tusk ivory, they harvested, but they left everything there. They had dislodged one tusk from the head and chopped the pulp cavity wall ivory. That's all they took. That's all they took. And then they left everything from the previously killed animal. How do I know that these things were from a previously killed animal? I
Age?
measured the strontium.
Where?
You measured the.
And
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
and they came from different geochemical provinces. And you have to be really careful about how you go about this. You measure just the teeth and the tusks, and then you measure the bone. You don't mix the two. And I compared that to the readings I got for the Bowser Road animal itself, and they were significantly different. Of course, that's obvious. There was wear on these things, but I had to prove it to the reader that these things were from another animal killed elsewhere.
So
And the bone, go ahead.
what did they
No.
harvest from this fresh kill?
All right.
What did they take from it?
They took more ribs to
Mhm.
make new atlatls.
Okay.
They took more ivory to make scrapers and adzes and other things, plus the adornos. They took the pelvis, the innominate bones. I didn't know why. I didn't know why at the time. Now I understand, because at the lower Blue Lick site, which we're going to talk about, the cross members for sleds are made from limb bones of proboscideans, but they're also made from pelvic bone fragments. And
Because they'd be
so
so
the pelvis,
strong, right?
so the pelvis at Bowser Road was missing. Another thing that was missing clearly, and we sieved with we dug everything. The tip of the tail was taken. The caudal vertebrae, 11 through 20 were missing. So they took the trophy, if you will, of the tail. I suppose the man who had the nerve to sever the Achilles tendon, he might have gotten the tail as his personal trophy. They took, in addition, they took the jaw, the lower jaw, the mandible.
Yep.
I didn't understand it at the time, but the mandible, we found the entire mandible, but the ascending rami that attached to the skull, those had been cut off. Now, the reason they did that, I would learn later by digging another site. They were making lamps from those. These people had lamp technology. After all, don't forget, there are many, many lamps in the old world. Likewise, these people had lamps. And for what did they want for the lamp? They wanted the ascending ramus where it locked into the skull. Why? Because it has
Had a little
shape.
cup for the oil.
It had a shape suggestive of a proboscidean. So if you're going to make a
Oh.
lamp, oh no, it's a
Oh.
piece. The piece we found at the Cedar Fork Creek site in Ohio, which gotten spoiled in its manufacture, was clearly a lamp being made, and the bone they were making it from had the outline of the back of a mastodon. Everyone knew that that bone, who lived at that time, had the shape of a mastodon, and they harvested.
So symbolically, that is so beautiful to have its representation, to find it in nature, to light your way
ritualize the
with
tool,
that very
ritualize
sacred
the
animal.
tool, yeah.
And Adorno, I just want to define that for those who didn't
Honoring.
hear James last week, little carvings of that ivory of mastodon placed in the atlatl, which maybe gave it more power symbolically.
I didn't even know enough at the time to look for atlatls. Do you realize that Adorno, made of ivory in the shape of a mastodon, sat in my drawer next to my desk for a year before? But why did I open that drawer and bring that out? Because when I was examining the atlatls, I recognized them to be atlatls. I found a rectangular abraded place right on the axis of this polished atlatl. And I said, what in the devil did they roughen this thing for? They were gluing something or attaching it something to there with mastic. And you have to scuff a smooth surface in order to make glue stick. And then I said, oh, and I reached opened the drawer and took out that Adorno, and it fitted in that place exactly. Plus it had a curvature which mimicked the curvature, conformed to the curvature of the rib from which the atlatl had been made. QED. I'm learning, as you realize. I have to learn, but I have access to data, and I take my time with it. So I learn these things. Well,
I just want to say they had cordage, they had glue. They didn't have Gorilla Glue. They made glue from tree sap, from bitumen. I mean, they were using their materials that they had on hand ingeniously.
And I have to just stop for a moment and just honor the concept of ritual itself and how it's so ingrained into the human experience that we take the time, that we go to these extra steps to create ritual around our tools and how we use our tools, whether it's building a stone structure like Stonehenge, or whether going back way back in time and looking at how each bone had a specific purpose and how it was placed in a specific place. And this idea that it's ingrained into the human story just fascinates me, and it's something that
And let's give credit for the innovation, the wisdom, the cultural heritage and endurance and the knowledge base, and just making do with what you have.
Yeah.
Well,
Tony's asking if a bone has more structural strength than a stick to make a spear or an atlatl, which you throw.
well, actually, I have to say this. I'm not sure that the atlatls and all the equipment that we found broken up on that animal, the Bowser Road mastodon, was used for day-to-day hunting. These may have been reserved for exclusively for the use for killing proboscideans. The question is, how frequently were these animals killed? And you realize that when I'm the first person to recognize a ritually killed proboscidean in the New World. And of course, I know, as an anthropologist, I know about periodic rituals that all human societies have. In Africa, for example, every 7 to 10 years, young men are circumcised, and you have to be able to throw a big party. You have to have a lot of food. You have to bring people together, and it can't be done oftener than every 7 to 10 years. There just aren't resources for it. There are many ceremonies like this and I can name others among human societies in the world, but these periodic rituals, might it have been that mastodons were only killed every 7 to 10 years? It was a ritual observance. I doubt if they killed them more often than every 7 to 10 years. But if I use that as my model, it's the first time that we have an idea of how frequently the proboscideans were killed. Up to this time, we didn't have a good idea. We thought they were killed for meat or whenever people felt like it or whatever, but that's not the way it's going to take place. These are dangerous animals. There are many dangers inherent in killing these enormous creatures. This notion, a simplistic notion, that people are standing back and throwing atlatls from 20, 30 feet away within killing range of their killing range by that animal, throwing these and trying to get them between the ribs, that's folly. I mean, that's silly. That's a good way to commit suicide.
Enrage it, and it will just come and stampede you down. Well, isn't like the Maasai have a ritual of, let's go out, you're a young man, let's bring you into manhood and go kill a lion? You're saying that for them it was kill a mastodon or a mammoth, depending on where they were, and they're going to do it in a initiation community-wide, and so it will be a ritual. It will be
but the important thing is
becoming
that people come together. Characteristically, a tribe, a Clovis tribe, there are too many people living in one place that you can't support an entire tribe. But you can support a moiety or a half living in one place, and 50, 60 miles away, another moiety, and you need an excuse for them to come together periodally. Why is that?
Find mates, exchange, say
you
hello,
find
keep
your
the family
marriage
together.
partner in the other moiety. And for social harmony, you can't find it in your own moiety. You understand? So
it's probably prohibited. Yeah.
It was probably prohibited, but it was, ill-advised. So people come together, and this is their excuse, a joint ritual. It's good. It makes good sense. It's important for the success of human beings. This is a wise adaptation, a wise behavior. And
well, you're describing a cultural network of exchange. So of course you would exchange with your local groups if you're trading with a huge.
1 year you host the event, and 7 to 10 years later, the other moiety hosts it in a different geochemical province, and you kill a mastodon over there. This is what I think was done. Now,
okay, how many? You're describing a single mastodon that would feed a huge community
Well,
feast,
for a couple
right?
of weeks, yes.
Yeah. But I mean, how many? And you were finding these in a bog where there was a spring. So the mastodons would come and drink from the spring, and a bog just happened to grow up to better preserve this whole thing
No,
for
it was the
15,000 years.
edge of a shallow lake with
Mhm.
a spring that came into it at that point.
Okay.
People, of course, riding in snowmobiles these days learn very quickly to stay away from the edges of lakes unless they want to drive over where a spring comes in, the ice is thin. Well, this is important to the Proboscideans in the Ice Age because they need 50 gallons of water every day if they're like any other Proboscidean to digest the food they've taken in. That's a lot of water. And in the wintertime, it's a white desert out there. Everything's frozen. So you've got to know where to get water. That's terribly important. And springs are such places, saline springs in particular.
Salt
So
licks. The
salt
animals
licks,
seek salt as well.
absolutely. But they need the water there as well. So this was soon learned by the Proboscideans on where to go, and the
Mhm.
people soon learned where the
Where to find him.
Proboscideans.
It's like the watering hole at any
Exactly right.
office, right? That's
It
where you
was no
gather.
mystery finding a
Mhm.
Proboscidean when you needed to kill it every 7 to 10 years.
Mhm.
And knowing the rate of predation, now imagine every Clovis tribe is killing a Proboscidean.
Oh, every
Hopefully,
tribe. Okay.
every tribe. And how many tribes are there? They're scattered across the New World.
Mhm.
And we were breeding successfully, and the tribes were increasing. But the problem is with this uh, worship, if you will, of the Proboscidean. We live to be about the same age, and
120
we
years.
reproduce about the same age. But when their gestation rate is 22 months, ours is 9, we outbreed them. When they have 400 children, we have 1,000. And in a growing population, even if we only kill these animals every 7 to 10 years, it's not sustainable. We
Okay,
will
but a couple
drive them.
questions. So,
Mm.
mastodons and mammoths lasted until how long? Because they actually some small band of them came through the Ice Age on some island and
But
lasted until 4,000 years ago.
in North
But
America and South America generally, in
yeah.
the vast territory, all Proboscideans came to an end at the same time, 12,200 years ago.
Okay, and you're saying a lot of it wasn't just climate change because they were Ice Age animals. The climate
What
changed,
does
they're
South
losing
America
some
have
habitat.
in common with North America in terms of climate? It's in
Oh,
another hemisphere, but
Ice Age.
we have in common are that human beings live in both places.
Oh, okay.
See, that's why I don't believe in climate change and things like that. I think that human beings are directly responsible for the demise of Proboscideans. When these people entered the New World,
Well,
um,
I'm just kind of just trying to grapple with that because if you're so dependent on a mastodon, you don't want to wipe them out. When we were in Australia looking at a water hole with a guide who was telling us this was taboo. You don't go and foul with human scent and a water hole that you want to attract the animals to. You're only going to take one kangaroo that goes to water there and feed there at a time. You don't want to wipe out the herd. You're dependent on it. So they carefully guarded their environment for sustainability. Why wouldn't these people think about sustainability? You're suggesting that their cultural needs, their traditions, let's go kill a mastodon, each tribe every 10 years, this is important, would outweigh their environment? Wouldn't they notice, oh, the mastodons are thinning, let's preserve them?
well,
Maybe, I mean, why not put a taboo in place? I
the
mean,
same
ancient
question
people
can
were
be
so
asked
good at
for
making
people of the
taboos to protect their
Go
resources.
ahead.
right,
Yeah.
but the same question can be asked of the old world peoples who then came into the New World. And you realize mammoths who which became the focus of Ice Age art in caves and so forth
Yeah.
eventually in Magdalenian times. The fact is they died uh, had died probably 16, 17,000 years ago. And this wave of extinction started in Western Europe and went all the way across to Eastern Eurasia and then into the New World. The people are involved in it. I don't, the
People are
worship of,
involved, but are they the ones that push them over the edge?
well, they don't do them any good. I can say that.
Even with the
We can agree on
veneration
that,
and
yeah.
my culture is centered upon you, and I'm going to kill you off. That's wow.
You see, what happens
But
is
look at
that
us. Look at the extinctions we're responsible for today. Because
at
our
another,
cultural
yeah,
needs, our culture to maintain it, we're just going to take out the environment and grab resources. As we're guilty
We
of
haven't
same.
learned, yeah.
We are guilty of same
well,
that you're describing. We
this
haven't learned.
extinction of the Proboscideans, which I think was in human hands, is well showed at the Hiscox site. I would like, if this is possible, to put up the image of the greenbacks, those two green reports side by side. Oh yeah, here we
Okay,
go.
but also explain the camel and the sloth and the rhino and all the other
Afterwards,
megafauna as
yeah.
well.
Well, I wish I could explain each of these animals, but I don't really know enough to do it. I
Yeah.
mean, I haven't, I'm just one guy. I'm pretty much an expert on Proboscidean skeletons and
Okay, let's hear you out.
but I don't know much about the rest.
Okay.
But here are these two. Here's the Hiscox site in Western New York, a paleontological site. Was dug. I rediscovered the site in 1982, and I turned it over to a paleontologist to dig. I had no idea what I had rediscovered, but the two reports came out. These are those reports, and recently, in the next image, you'll see that this book has just come out, Columbia University Press, by the paleontologist Dr. Richard S. Laub, a colleague of mine, and this is entitled 2 Acres of Time. Now, at this site, believe it or not, we see the reason why the Proboscideans, this is a 13,000-year-old site, not as early as the ones that, there are earlier sites, but this was a glaciated area. So it wasn't capable of being lived at until, say, 13,000 to 13,500 years. In any case, here at this site, which is late site, we find that the people, they had to kill a full-grown animal, and it's usually a bull. But of the 16 or 17 mastodons that are represented at this site, we have the tusks for these animals. Dr. Dan Fisher from the University of Michigan, who is an expert on proboscideans, he looked at the tusks and did thin sectioning and analysis, and he was shocked to observe that 4 full-grown females are being killed at the height of their reproductive age. So when they're killed, God knows how many calves die at the same time, yet unborn. And they had not died because of any dietary deficiency. It was a mystery to him that why they died at all. But it's not a mystery to me, because they began to kill females at the end of things, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Were there human artifacts to demonstrate it was humans who killed these 4 female mastodons?
Well, Dan Fisher did. I've seen. Oh yes, Dan Fisher he didn't do that. He did it by the tusks, but he was able to show that they are dying for mysterious reasons. And I think it's no mystery to me, because those animals were there, their bones were there, plus hundreds, thousands of broken up atlatls.
Okay, well that's
yeah, and so they died on the ice, and they sank into the bottom of the pond. But it's, in any case, I see this happening, and the Hiscox site, the paleontologists don't accept this idea because they're not archaeologists. They just don't have the perspective of having recognizing artifacts and to this day. But in any case, this
So if it
idea,
hadn't been for humans, we might have mastodons or elephants roaming around Alaska still. You're saying they
well,
could be here if we hadn't killed them off.
we have the same worry though in Africa for the elephants there.
Mhm.
We have to preserve those animals at all costs. I've had the privilege, and maybe you haven't had, or maybe you have. I've walked out of doors within 30, 40 feet of a big bull elephant, and he knew I was there, and I knew he was there, and we went about our business in mutual respect. We weren't we
That's
weren't
right.
prey of one another. I mean, I've had that privilege, and I wish to God my great grandchildren have that privilege as well.
Yeah.
But who knows? Who
Right.
knows if they will?
Yeah.
I People kill off things for the damnedest reasons, or pardon my English, but it's true. But in any case, what I'm doing is suggesting, hypothesizing that the rate of predation was every 7 to 10 years, not more often.
I see.
Or they
That
would have
so
gone quicker.
the
Yeah.
implication that mammoths and mastodon had been the focus of socio-religious behavior and not just a source of much meat made it likely that such ritual behavior had been introduced from the old world at an early date where it had developed since the Aurignacian period and perhaps even before then. The thought that I had stumbled upon such evidence at Bowser Road boggled my mind. Knowing something of modern Proboscidean habits, gestation periods, and understanding the apparent contradiction that human beings venerated them by slaying them,
Mhm.
I was able to argue that Proboscideans disappeared from the Northern Hemisphere as a result of human predation and not due to any imagined changes of climate, comet collisions, etc. Okay, and this, well, not everyone will agree with me. That's the way it is. The Bowser Road site in eastern New York State, the track of evidence the track of evidence has led me to the Hiscock site in western New York State, and then to Cedar Fork Creek site in Ohio, afterwards to the Coates Hines Litchie site in Tennessee, and finally to the Lower Blue Lick site in Kentucky. It
Mhm.
needs to be understood that at each of these places we observe evidence of interaction of human beings and proboscideans and a lot of artifacts, contrary to what I was been told for all my life as a child. So I know where to look for these things now and find this stuff. This evidence includes proboscidean bone and ivory artifacts, something in earlier years I had been taught would be impossible to discover in sufficient numbers to be useful for archaeological interpretations. Having spent 28 days going through the Hiscock collection in storage at the Buffalo Museum of Science, and by the way, I'm the only archaeologist who's given that kind of time to that collection.
That's a
The
thorough
collection,
examination, 30 days. Yeah.
you've got to go to museums. You can't just go in the field. You've got to go to old collections and museums as
Right.
well.
Mhm.
And that's really very important. So I spent 28 days. I gave 28 days to going through that collection. And we found wonderful things. But the most important discovery was this something that came to light when I went through the collection. I found the burial of a shaman. There had been, in addition to all the killing of animals that had taken place at Hiscock, there had been an interment of a 27 to 39-year-old woman of slight build, kind of like you, Laura, had been buried there. Along with a sled, use a hearse, if you will, used to transport her body, a dog that had likely been used to haul the sled. But dogs, of course, are psychopomps, and go to lead the person to the netherworld, through the portal to the netherworld, a heap of artifacts, and upon this woman's body, the most fantastic shaman's staff that will ever be my privilege to discover. This was a 50-inch long piece of caribou antler, and those are extinct animals, that had a Y stick at one end with a head painted red, and an eagle at one end and a dog at the other end. The dog of a lower world animal, and the eagle of the upper world, depending. And so you could flip the stick and use the staff in many ways. And there are illustrations in the old world, in the Altai mountain region, of shaman people using such staffs with a Y stick at the top and a Y stick at the bottom. And
I just want to mention James Harrod gave
Hmm.
such a great presentation with all of those artifacts, which he decoded. That's on our YouTube channel. So that if you haven't seen that from last week, go take a look at that and you'll see exactly what you're talking about in
Yeah.
detail.
Well, the thing is,
Yeah.
in addition to the things that were probably made for that shaman, there were heirloom pieces. When radiocarbon dated, they
Wow.
were several hundred years older,
Wow.
and they had been interred in the pile of artifacts. There were some pieces of whoever put that ivory adze there. We haven't dated that yet, but that had a shape of a mammoth on it. And that's mammoths are
Mammoths are a
characteristically,
little bit different from mastodons.
yeah, they're somewhat older in a general terms. So it
Wow.
it was a pile of heirloom pieces, I thought, and including a Gravettian bead. Now, a Gravettian bead pendant is a fossile directeur for the Gravettian. Just like Clovis points are fossile directeurs for the Clovis culture. And if you find one, you have the Clovis culture by definition. If you find a Gravettian bead pendant, you have the Gravettian culture. And by definition, I found one unrecognized in a drawer where the Hiscock material was stored. And Gravettian bead pendants are characteristically made by taking the tip, a tusk, a huge tusk, and you strike off flakes from the very tip of the tusk. So how many flakes can be yielded by the tip of a tusk? Not many. And you can't make many bead pendants. So each of these bead pendants is precious. Maybe represents a proboscidean that was killed. I don't know about that, but we found a Gravettian bead pendant. Gravettian culture, that is proof by way of thinking that Gravettian is present in the New World. And I have found many other things that corroborate my belief. All right.
Do you want to talk about the diadems? Because you have them on your desk, you said. That is interesting.
And also we have many questions.
Now,
yeah.
Yeah, I just have a couple of pages. I'm going to finish here with this presentation.
Yeah.
And then we'll get to that very interesting topic about the diadem. But you know what? I'm going to wear a diadem, okay? Of plastic, I mean, from this point on, because you mentioned the word for the first time. So now I'm wearing a diadem so that all our people in the audience, they know what a diadem is. It's a headband, right? So
and it's so exciting when ancient artifacts are things that we still use and make today. That's so cool.
We're all human beings.
Yeah.
We all have heads and hair that needs to be pushed back with such a thing. In any case, the Clovis age burial of a shaman at the Hiscock site with her possessions, a funeral sled made of a sacred proboscidean, and a dog that presumably had drawn this sled are first for the New World. And until we discovered and dated absolutely a second burial sled at the Lower Blue Lick site, Kentucky, the Hiscock sled was the oldest such conveyance known in the world. You know, it's amazing to think that in the old world, we have no sled remains older than 9,000 to 10,000 years. It's a wooden sled. It was found on Zakov Island by Vladimir Petulko, a Russian colleague. And and it's an important find. And I don't doubt that the Clovis people and their precursors who entered the New World had wooden sleds. But for the purposes of burial, they were constructing sleds of made of tusks. They had cross members made of bone. There should be 4 of these cross members here. And when we had this drawing made, there were only 2 that we knew about. We have 2 more. So there are 4 cross members drawn by the dog. You know, the dog at Hiscock is a Samoyed-sized dog. It's amazing. A Samoyed is a good sled dog. I mean, a great sled dog. Here's the body of the shaman going to be given burial. There's a spear, a dart with a spear thrower showed. The woman who's with her hands on the uprights, wearing a pair of antlers and having a drum, and she's holding the staff, shaman's staff. And that is exactly what we dug up at the Hiscock site. So this is a composite drawing, if you will, of the sled from Lower Blue Lick that we would find, and then the first one that became known, the Hiscock site sled. But we have 2 such sleds. Can you imagine how our good fortune to find 2 such sleds? It means if we look in the right places, at springs, at saline springs, we'll find more of this evidence. Now we know where to look for this kind of wonderful evidence. And as scientists, I want to continue that search.
If you have sleds, you can transport a lot of heavy meat. If you have ice, even if it's wood, you can drag, right? Otherwise, you're carrying it on your shoulders. So it seems to me it would be logical to take a frozen skin or something and load up what you wanted to carry and drag it. And then wood,
There are many kinds of sleds.
Yeah, lots of different kinds of sleds. You can make
Many
boats pretty
conveyances.
easily. You can make sleds pretty easily. Water always being a highway. But so if you made them out of wood, they would disintegrate. You found this because the rails, you say, were split mammoth tusks lengthwise. How do you
Correct.
even do that? Lengthwise. And so
Well,
done for
yes.
ceremonial reasons. But unless it's in a bog, you're not going to find these preserved remains such as wood or, bogs
And we
preserve
should be
things a lot
looking
better.
in bogs. We should
Yeah.
force ourselves to investigate saline spring bogs. If you go to the Hiscock site today, it's the most unpromising place to think of digging you can imagine. There's a cattail swamp there. The springs bubble up right there. And yet that was when the people were there, it looked very much like that. Maybe there was more open water, but it got iced over in the winter, and they performed these rituals upon the ice. And when the ice melted, the thing sank into the water
Give it into
2
Mother
feet,
Earth and it would
and they
just
came
swallow it
to
up
rest.
ritually. Wow.
That's right. So but
And so
it's
how do you
at
split a tusk? You said in minus 20-degree weather, a tusk is splittable lengthwise. Really? How do they?
our Russian colleagues who find a lot of mammoths
Yeah.
have always been interested in how mammoth tusk ivory was workable. You can't work it very easily at normal conditions inside your house, but when the temperature is minus 20 to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, ivory behaves completely differently. It can be flaked as if it were rock. It can be split down the middle into planks. All sorts of things can be done with ivory at that temperature.
And stone tools like drive a little wedge in, like you would split stone away from a rock face and
That's
just
correct.
splits on the grain or something.
Yes, you could use stone tools, wooden tools to wedge things apart. You could use these adzes. I suppose they could be viewed as wedges for making things like that. So it's who knows but I think they're easily the alternative word for an adze is a wedge.
Okay.
You see.
So so adze, ADZE. So if it needs to be 20 degrees for these things to be manufactured, that indicates a climate where it got to be 20 degrees. They didn't have refrigeration back then. You depended on your climate to provide minus 20 degrees.
And
Minus
this
20
was a
degrees, that's
very,
cold.
it was a very cold and challenging climate. And I want to say this, among the many, many tools that I recognized in spending 28 days going through the Hiscox site collection, I found over 1,150 bone, antler, and ivory tools that had never been recognized before. But I found
Wow.
a number of snow knives, long pieces of ivory that had been made into dully sharp edges, and among the Eskimo who use such devices even today to make snow houses, they need a pana, they call it panas, to cut the ice or the snow rather of a certain consistency to make snow blocks to make their houses. And
Wow.
we found pana. So that is a clear indicator. The sleds, the pana, the dogs, it's an indicator of a neo-Arctic or an Arctic environment. It is.
Gotcha. Yeah. If you go
Yeah.
with the evidence.
Gramly, why don't we take some questions? We have quite a few people who are asking questions in the chat room,
Sure.
and we've been waiting for some time to get in on this conversation. So,
It's a good place to stop for the moment, this reading. Yes, let's take some questions.
okay,
Please.
Tony Hull is first. Here he is over here. Hello, Tony.
Hello, and thank you. This is certainly a voted presentation. There's so much information, and I've have all these questions. I wish I was sitting in the room with you and being able to ask in real time. But one of the things that interests me, of course, is the atlatl, and the range can be quite considerable with that. A story I learned years ago is that the archaeologist Frank Hibben was demonstrating to his class at the University of New Mexico. It went, I think, 2.5 to 3 times, the projectile went 2.5 to 3 times farther than he expected and lodged in the front door of the Zimmerman Library. So when the Hibben Center was built, it faces the Zimmerman Library, skewed to other buildings on campus. Well, that's just a little aside question, but I mean, I don't know what the range of an atlatl is. I've not thrown one personally, but I mean, it might be approaching 100 meters. Who knows?
Admittedly, but if you believe in my idea that the animals were forced to the ground by severing their Achilles tendon,
Yes.
what you had to do, analogous to the Spanish matador, I suppose, who puts his sword to either side of the backbone into the vitals, the aorta, gets it down, it kills the animal almost instantly,
Right.
if it's a good kill.
Right. So,
any
so
case-
that's the clarification I needed. Thank you.
Yeah, and the atlatl at short range can be thrown, the dart that you throw, tipped, by the way, with a bone point made from mastodon rib.
No.
The idea was to throw that to either side of the backbone. The ribs are rounded there, and if it doesn't, unlucky shot, it'll lodge in the bone. But if most often it skids off the bone or goes in between the ribs and goes right into the vitals. You know, when I went through everything from the Hiscox site, and I went through all the ribs. I found the marks of 14 bone or ivory points that made divots or holes into those were miscast into the ribs. I didn't find one piece with a flake stone artifact lodged in it. When you killed ritually that animal, it had to be done only with pieces of the very animal, the previously killed animal.
Okay. So a couple other quick observations. The sled looked to be extremely inefficient for moving things, having very low surface area. So I'm thinking again that this was a ceremonial sled and not a util sled. But then I was really perplexed, if I understood correctly, that there would be kill sites with 16 to 17 animals within a 2-acre locus. And that I find extraordinary. I'm trying hard to understand that.
Well, I don't actually. I'm prepared to argue that at Hiscock, which was resorted to for 700 years, we have mastodons dated over a 700-year period. It's more likely that we have the bones yet undug. There's a lot of that site yet undug. We have the bones and ivory representing 60 to 80 mastodons
Okay, so
who
this is
met their
because,
end there.
all right, this is because there's a spring and a deep bog there, and maybe even they got stuck in the bog partially. So there's a reason why that particular area is there. The mastodons were not moved. But
The
that's
people knew where to get the animals. They always had to come there because of the saline spring to get water in
right.
the middle of winter for 700 years. The people knew where to go to get an animal when they needed to kill it ritually. They didn't
Right.
have to, it
Okay,
wasn't
well,
rocket science.
well, thank you. This is the clarification I needed. I was envisioning that animals were in some way killed and moved there, so I did not follow that. I do now.
Oh, yeah.
10-ton
Tony.
animal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
Perfect.
very much.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.
Sam Briggs, would you like to make, I see your comment in the chat room, put you on?
He says, I have personally made atlatls hand split from elephant rib bones, and I have worked a lot of mastodon ivory into tools. Oh, we'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah.
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 So would I.
Yeah, he has, here he goes. There you are.
Hello and welcome.
Hey, Scano, Mike.
Yeah.
Hey, Sam.
Hey, yeah, I've done quite a few of these different pieces, and I've been fortunate that go to the Hitchcock site, which is only about 8 miles from our reservation, so that's our traditional territory. And me and Mike and stuff have been up there with Tyler and a couple others, but I've been there a number of years that we look after a lot of that. But yeah, I have one of the guys from the Archaeological Society here is just acquired another elephant rib bone, and Tyler's going to videotape for this documentary that we're doing, and we're actually going to make an atlatl. I've made them out of buffalo rib, made them out of cow rib, and now this one, and then I hunt with them. I've actually taken deer and small game, and then used them for fishing. But this is one that we're going to actually do a replication at the French Creek Archaeological Society.
Wow. And which archaeological society is it?
The French Creek Archaeological Society in
French
Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So
I'm a
we'd like
member
to
of that
throw an
society.
atlatl. Yeah.
I'm a member myself.
Yeah.
By the way, may I insert a comment here?
Please.
The use of rib. One of the defining characters of Gravettian culture is that in post-Aurignacian times, the Gravettian times, they found the ribs of mammoths to be the most useful bone in the entire body for making tools. And it wasn't just atlatls. They were making spear points out of it, and they were making polissoirs and other things out of the ribs. So the ribs are, when I witnessed the fact that ribs are being used and harvested at the Bowser Road site, that was a reason I was inclined to believe this was a Gravettian site.
Mm.
Among other evidence.
Yeah.
Wow. Sam, would you like to join us on a Sunday and talk about your work and your culture? We'd love that.
And yeah, it's possible we can talk about it.
We talk off.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
We'll get in
Yeah, I
contact.
know you have lots of
Very good.
stories. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And good to meet you.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Well, let me see. I was going to mention, Fred, did you have a comment? I noticed a couple of comments in the chat room, and you also posted a link to something, and I haven't been able to follow it
I
all
think
up.
Tyler was saying that mastodons were found covered with red ochre,
Oh.
which is also a ritual substance used. And I think there were lots of sites where ochre was a trade good and highly valued, not just in the old world, but in the new world as well.
Okay, Tyler,
Right.
we'll put you on then. Here we go.
Yeah. Do you want to comment on that?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a filmmaker. I've been working with Dr. Gramly and Sam Briggs, and this is my 3rd year. I'm doing a movie about the cultural erasure of Native Americans. through the actual destruction of artifacts, misinformation. And I'm very happy to be with Dr. Gramly because he's a man of science who really, uses fact, and he has been criticized by what other archaeologists call the Clovis police. So anytime somebody mentions anything quite old, there seems to be a contention against them, and it's in the film. You'll be quite fascinated. I have interviewed quite a few archaeologists, and I'm not done yet, and have been on the sites. I was very excited when I saw this beautiful split tusk, and the photographs behind me.
Oh,
yeah.
wow. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Dr. Gramly.
Like a
And I
plank.
was allowed to film that, and you'll see the end was carved so that on that side there. So these were,
Oh, like a
and it's got
chevron
ochre
shape.
on it. So that's, they had ochre on them, and they had been in the museum for a long time and not been categorized properly. It's not really necessary to dig anymore. There's so many things in museums that have not been categorized properly. You have people who, there's a kind of a racism, I hate to say it, but, they didn't want to say that Native Americans were here for thousands and thousands of years. It kind of went against the conversation of, well, we wiped these people out. It's unfortunate, but there was a lot of reasons why the facts, as Dr. Gramly finds, were not found, or they weren't even tried to be found. And I was appalled when I was in the Byron site and interviewed many people to find out that a certain archaeologist was a creationist, and he did not want to say that there possibly were people there prior to 10,000 years because of his religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs. Now, I'm not making that up. That was something that was told to me on film by people working at the museum for 23 years, examining things. The human bones were not given back, still have not been given back to the Haudenosaunee or Seneca. They have not been returned. They were never dated properly. And in fact, one of the people who were in charge of the bones stated that they had been dipped in alcohol for a good 2 weeks. So really, this is another aspect, say the dark side of archaeology,
Sure.
that I find it very interesting. Things are changing now. There's a lot of archaeologists like Dr. Gramly who work with Native Americans who ask, what is this? Like, you'll find something, but if you're interpreting it from your own culture,
Yeah.
so
You have a
you
lens
ask
on.
a Native American, what is this? And he's one of the few people who does that. And when archaeologists are doing that, they're discovering much more incredible things that they never imagined.
Right.
And that there was a very complex and very intricate society here, many societies, many people. And it has to be honored at some point, and so that there can be true healing, not just here on this continent, but I think internationally. You can't just deny people their culture. It's a terrible
And
kind
their
of
full
genocide.
history.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have to, I'm very happy to be here with Dr. Gramly because he's somebody I really respect. And I'm very happy that Sam Briggs is my friend too, because he's an incredible person. And he actually did a ceremony at the Blue Lick site that he allowed us to film, which was so beautiful. And I'm very honored indeed to have these wonderful people and to be discovering so much. I have to say that things are changing. There's a lot of people, a lot of white people who are supporting the truth and who are trying to stop the destruction of Native American sites. Like right now, Massachusetts, the Historical Commission regularly destroys the Native American sites to put in solar fields, and this is bad habit. So, there's a lot of states that don't even accept ceremonial stone sites, which is ridiculous. So we have a long ways to go, but I do think there's a lot of change happening, and very nice people like everybody here who obviously wants the truth and wants to support other people.
You know, it's a,
Thank you for your work. Thank you
Yeah.
for helping to bring the
Yeah,
story out
absolutely.
and documenting it.
And it's sort of the foundation of this institute. Dr. Goodman took it on the nose many times as an anthropologist who was willing to take a risk in her research and put it out there in a way that went against the grain of some of the current day thoughts at the time. And so it takes people like Gramly to push forward. We're very fortunate with Christine Van Poel from the University of Missouri, who's been an advisor to our institute as an anthropologist, and her husband Todd, and helping us that the people that are willing to, as an anthropologist, work hand in hand with indigenous cultures and not step on indigenous cultures, that they can work together in a friendship and a cooperation to protect. And that's
And also illuminate.
right.
Just down the road, Ken Zoll talked to the Hopi culture
Right.
to understand better the petroglyphs of the Sinagua culture.
Right. Good point.
And decoded, hey, this is a solar calendar and a ritual site. So I mean that
Yeah.
knowledge
More and more.
is
And
so
we
valuable.
we
Bruce
want
Bradley talked about, and Cindy
Sure.
going to the Pueblo people to decode little clay statues they found in a kiva.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because if they set in the kiva during ritual, or
Yeah,
whatever,
they said we
you
do
grab a
that
ball of clay
still.
and
This is
yeah,
what they're
yeah.
long rituals. We're doing something
Exactly,
with our hands. Yeah.
exactly.
So
And we do want to
right,
have,
more and more,
we
which
want
is-
to invite more and more indigenous voices to be a part of our conversation. We're very fortunate to have access to the academic scientific community. We also want to have the indigenous voice side by side. So we continue to
Open
send an
invitation.
open invitation to those voices
Yeah.
to hear more. So thank you for the work that you're doing, for sure.
and please join us on a Sunday when your
we'll
film
talk.
is ready.
Yeah, let's have a conversation.
Yeah, let's hear more.
do that.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Tyler.
Yeah, and I also brought on where I lost it here.
Fred,
Fred,
did you say?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I think he must have lost him here. Here he is. Hi, Fred.
Okay.
I'm going to have you join the conversation as well. Thank you, Tyler.
Hi there. Thank you. Yes, I've been sitting here very interested in all the proceedings. This is obviously not my field of the early peopling of the American, of the Western Hemisphere, but so things come up always that I have questions about, and somewhere up above, way up in the comments, there was a little discussion, maybe with Tyler also, about circumcision. And I just wondered what kind of evidence there really is for that, given that circumcised parts are always, they don't last long like bones do, for example. I just don't know what the archaeological evidence is for that.
Did this come up in the chat room?
Yeah,
What was the comment? What are we following up on?
Richard, you brought that up earlier, the circumcision issue. Some people misinterpret it to be you were talking about Native Americans, but I thought you were saying Africans. But what?
Well, I was talking about Africans. Of course, I lived in Kenya for many years, and I got to know ritual experts who did circumcision. They're not usually they don't make good next door neighbors, these people. They tend to live in isolation. You can always tell where a ritual expert who circumcises both male and female lives, because there's a big bush or a tree next to his house, which is used to store things, and it's not a place to go. Children probably are in fear of it at nighttime. No one likes to go there. But actually, these people, I've gone there and I've spoken with these people at length, and they brought out their equipment. They have equipment they use, and there are special little knives which are used to circumcise. And I suppose they are separable from the rest of the knives that are used routinely. So there's a special class of artifacts used in circumcision. I don't believe we've ever found anything like that in the New World or in these ancient sites I'm interested in, but we can speculate that we could look for them, you see. And there are many things that we should look for which have yet to be found. I would say, and in that regard, answering your question, the one artifact I feel certain will come to hand one day on a site in the New World is a Venus figurine, because those are a part and parcel of Gravettian culture. They are found in extreme eastern Eurasia at just slightly before the Proboscideans went extinct there. And of
Like
course,
the Malta sites and Malta Barrett.
yes, of course, there are many in the Malta site north of Lake Baikal, but there's some even more to the east of that. And I think we'll find them one day, provided we look in the right places.
You have any idea where that might be?
Yes, I do. At the Hiscock site, I'll tell you, I'll be blunt with you. The man who dug that site studiously avoided digging 2 squares that likely have the remains of the rest of the shaman's body. And that's where we will likely find such vestiges, heirlooms perhaps, of Gravettian antiquity.
Who controls that site? Who gives permission to dig there? Who oversees
The
that?
Museum of Science owns the site. I rediscovered the site. We didn't own it then. But the museum eventually bought it. I didn't know what I know today. In 1982, I was a lot more stupid then, okay, I have to say, about these matters. Naive, I guess would be the word I would use. I was interested only in stone tools. How is that? But now I wouldn't do that again. I wish I had kept, well, you know, that's hindsight. I don't, Dr. Laub did a very good job in taking the material out of the ground. His reports of what he found, though, leave much to be desired. And of course, he avoided a couple of places where he should have dug. But you know, these are preserved.
And maybe
Sam
there's better
Briggs,
tools and techniques today. So maybe.
Sam Briggs is watching over that to make sure that no
good.
injustice is done. These were, you know, Seneca Iroquois lands. They're still being watched over by the Seneca Iroquois.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank-
And Native Americans have a lot more power now today to say what happens and who has access to sites with their heritage. So if you can link that up. Yeah.
Thank you, Fred.
So, anything else, Fred? Just Fred, interesting about this mother culture idea, isn't it? Wouldn't this kind of data explain the mother culture as theorized by Michael Witzel and others?
Ooh.
It's a big topic. We'll save that for another
Well, I
day.
mean, I thought about that, and of course, I wrote a major review of his
Yeah, that's why I bring it up.
book. And I that would be beyond my ability to comment. Really, I can't.
We can ask questions though.
Yeah,
we're here to ask
mean,
questions.
We always go beyond the
Yeah.
ability to comment. That's our style.
We push the seams of the envelope in our own way with questions. Oh yes.
All right.
So thank you, Fred.
Well, we have several other hands
Yeah.
up as well, so
Let's
let's
get-
take some more questions. Thank you, Fred. Let me see. Jury, how do you pronounce it? Jury, is that correct?
Jerry.
Yeah,
Oh,
there you go.
Jerry.
Yeah,
Yuri
Professor Jerry.
Klokula from Czechoslovakia.
Yes.
there he
Oh,
is.
hello there.
Oh,
Yeah,
wonderful.
But well, my best greetings to all of you from Poland, from Poznań, where I am at the university. But I'm Czech-born Canadian. But anyhow, Mike, I very much liked your very nice talk, and there would be many questions to talk about. But I just raised 2 points. First, I have no problem visualizing very speedy migration of Gravettian people across Eurasia, reaching North America, either prior to the last glacial maximum or shortly after it. Well, the second point, which is a question of like a discussion, relates to the Proboscidean disappearance, if solely people were involved or not. Well, I'm not a partisan of global climate change today, nor in the past. But since you know very well, we have been working in Siberia, in Yakutia for the last, well, myself in Siberia, 25 years, and in Yakutia, in the subarctic and Arctic, since 2009. And there are piles of bones, not just proboscideans like mammoths, but also bison, rhinoceros, horses. And somehow I cannot visualize that all of these animals, big animals of megafauna, would have been killed by people who would have been responsible for their vanishing. So mammoths, it's more or less like reducing this topic to a single animal species. What about the rest? Well, this would be my question to you.
Well,
people or the climate.
I had the same question. Yeah.
Yes, I can't, I don't speak for these other animals. I wish I did. I've come across giant moose elk and on some of the sites I've investigated, the one in Ohio, for example, where we found a mastodon as well. And that's the first time anyone has found a human association with a giant moose elk. So I'm just saying maybe some of this is because we have a very imperfect evidentiary base. So maybe there are sites out there that have a bearing on the extinction of these other animals, and it might have been in the human hands, but I'm certainly not aware of it at the moment. I have a hard enough time getting my ideas forward that people were had socio-religious relationship with Proboscideans in the New World. I wish I could tell you something more positive, Jerry, but I know one thing. At Hiscock, where there are as likely as many as 60 to 80 Proboscideans there, of which we know of roughly 18 at this time. There are also some remains of other animals. The caribou, it was often thought by paleontologists prior to my coming on the scene that there was evidence of caribou, and this was made good sense because it would have been a tundra before it became vegetated enough for mastodons to live there. But when you looked at the evidence, the actual evidence for caribou's presence, it was all antlers. And of all those antlers, they were all artifacts, virtually all artifacts. So that was nonsense about the caribou. But then there was a giant beaver tooth, and there was the tusk of a flat-headed peccary. There were bones of the giant condor and other animals of that nature. We can account for all of those because they are in clusters. They belong with other clustered artifacts. And you see, those animals they were present, but only as feather fans, and the giant beaver tooth has been turned into a graver, and the tusk was maybe a part of a shaman's kit, but they are clustered, you see. So and to a certain extent, human beings are involved with those animals, and they made things of them, but the Hiscock site, we misinterpret that. Those are viewed as by paleontologists as paleontological records. You find a giant beaver tooth at a site, it's regarded as proof that a giant beaver lived there. Well, that's not clear at all. The condors, you find that a condor feather fan, a few bones, that's viewed as condors in the air above that site. Well, maybe not so.
They have trade networks. Yeah.
So I'm just saying, with that single site, we have some possibility of complexity. Okay. But we also need more radiocarbon dates. Listen, I have this to show while we're talking about it. Okay. And while I'm wearing
it's quite fetching. I want to hear the diadem story.
I have this. This is a piece of cementum ivory, and it's probably a section of one of these diadems. Okay. And there it is. I mean, you can see it very well. It's beautifully made. we have other fragments of others. Do you realize I radiocarbon dated this piece, and I'm prepared to say that this piece, this possible diadem fragment, because it has it's smoothness on both sides, it has regularized edges. This likely artifact, this likely diadem section, I have a radiocarbon date for this, which is 29,400 radiocarbon years before present.
Where was this found again?
This was found at Lower Blue Lick in a trench that we dug last year.
In
Now,
the
why
States.
is that date? It's an impossibly early date compared for conventional ideas for people in the New World. But on the other hand, we both know, you, Jerry, and myself, there's a famous site in northeastern Siberia by the name of Yena rhinoceros horn site. And what is the age of that site? 28 to 30,000 radiocarbon years. And there are many such diadems at that site, 44 to be exact, plus ivory bracelets made of cementum. So these people were working beautifully, making beautiful artifacts of ivory. Now, is it a possibility that this was a pièce retrouvée and was introduced to the New World by some of these immigrant groups who had this in their possession from the Yena rhinoceros horn site itself, or maybe another site of similar richness and antiquity? We don't know. But we can know the truth by doing strontium analyses, et cetera, and that's
Or
exactly
identify
what
where it originated. So the
this
centum, the
piece,
centum is the inside of
the
the tusk,
cementum.
like the
No, the
dentum of a
cementum
tooth.
is the hard outer sheath that covers the dentin of the
Oh,
tusk.
okay. All right.
So that people learned early on how to split off that cementum, which has an even
Intact.
thickness, to make such wonderful ornaments, to make bracelets, all sorts of cool Gravettian type artifacts. You see?
So this could be another Paleolithic artifact, Gravettian artifact that you find in the New World, like the pendant at the tip of the tusk.
At
This is
Lower Blue
really
Lick,
identified with Gravettian culture.
at Lower Blue
it's a
Lick, which
diadem.
was south
Yeah.
of the late glacial maximum advance, and therefore never glaciated, and therefore always available for human settlement, even during the glacial maximum and before. This site is the proper place to look for this type of thing. And is it any wonder that that is where we found the second sled that we have? You know, these sleds, we can put a figure up on that you have, I think, in storage up on the screen, which shows it's taken from this article that is is going to appear in Anthropology in April, be published, you know, in April. But there you go. What you can see on the right-hand side is the array of 6 runners with 2 cross members, one of it broken, unfortunately. Now we have 2 more cross members that we just found recently made from the pelvic bones. We have that. And then on this left side, we call it in the figure, we have the full side of the sled, but only one of the runners of the other side. Fortunately, the 3 runners that are in line there of A, they were still found in the original positions where they had lain for 13,000 years, which was invaluable to us because the central runner is the longest and heaviest. And of course that's, and we call that the Papa Bear runner. So I've dated all 6 runners of B. And I have the results here, which I'm going to show you. And we haven't put those results out in that L'Anthropologie essay, which is coming out in April. But we do have them, and I'll tell you, it caused a surprise to me, because what I found is that the two load-bearing runners, the Papa Bear runners, the ones in the center, were a lot younger than were the cut down runners, the mama bear and baby bear runners at either end of the sled, suggesting there were two populations of ivory used to make this sled.
So
And
maybe
that,
those smaller runners were a heritage that became
well,
adapted to the new
they
sled.
turned
They're
out
older.
to be, yes, they could have been saved. They could have been heirloom pieces. I didn't think of that, but that's a that's a pure thought.
Well,
But
it's a way to continuity, to bring continuity to the
and there was
sacred
red ochre.
artifacts. Yeah.
There was red ochre on the sled B from Lower Blue Lick on one of the runners and one of the cross members. I mean, clear red ochre. So that sled had been, that hearse, that burial hearse, had been painted with red ochre. It was a lovely find. These sleds are very important, although I must say they have the right dimension for a good working sled. 8, 9, 10 feet long, 1/4 that width of that, 60 some centimeters, the width, or 70 centimeters. It is the correct proportion for a working sled, but I don't think that normally they would use sleds with ivory runners for normal
Everyday
communication.
use.
No, not for everyday use. So if we could do away with this illustration,
Yeah.
we'll show this now.
Okay.
I have a map of the sled from Lower Blue Lick with the radiocarbon dates
Okay.
inserted. And the two central runners, the ones that had to be strongest and made of
youngest.
freshest ivory, they date at 12,500 and 12,800 radiocarbon years before present, I believe in the 12,500 year age. But nonetheless, when you calibrate this, the age of this sled is 14,800 to 15,100 years. The other runners are from much older tusks, 17 to 20,000 calibrated years. This sled conveyance is the oldest in the world. It's the oldest dated, securely dated artifact we have in North America, and it's comparable in age to the oldest securely dated archaeological site in South America, Monteverde. So it's all part and parcel of the same antiquity. And I would argue it's not coincidental that Proboscideans disappeared in Eurasia generally 14.5 to 15,000 years ago. And here are people in the New World killing Proboscideans and making sleds out of them.
Continuing.
They came to the New World.
Wow.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure, quite an interesting idea. Just my last comment to it very shortly. Well, there are many analogies in technological processing of bone and ivory, as I see, between Siberia and New World, the Clovis culture, as you pretty well know, and also have documented, and which is just surprising that we haven't found until now any sled in Siberia in these piles of fossil bones or fossil remains, which have been articulated by many different ways by people. So I guess it's just a question of not time, but to make a more focused study on site and also in laboratory. Yeah, and
Well,
we can
answer-
make some arrangement for you to come to Siberia if you have time.
I'd love to come to Siberia.
To provide your own observation and studies. So,
You
but
know,
any
the
case,
best
thank you very much, yeah.
archaeologist, the best archaeologist, Jerry, is the one who's seen the most sites, right?
Yeah.
Just like the best geologist is the man or woman who's seen the most rocks. But
Yeah.
you know, we have to understand our limitations, our historical limitations. And I've told you something which I have come to realization by talking to various people working in Western Europe, that actual kill sites, the places where the animals actually expired, are very, very few that have ever been dug in the entire old world. I think it's fewer than 5 that have been dug. In the New World, we've dug, well, maybe that many. It's just that we still have things to find, is what
There's a
I'm
lot
trying
more
to-
buried in the ground.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's just wonderful. This
Yeah.
man, Jerry, he's really he publishes fantastic articles about Paleolithic archaeology in the
Yeah.
Ural Mountain region, in the Kolyma River region of the far northeastern Siberia, Kazakhstan, many, many places. And yeah, I'm glad to hear that you've moved to Poland to a university now, but and it's nice seeing you, Jerry.
Well, yes.
Yeah, and we hope to be
It's a
seeing more
pleasure
of
to
you
me,
on a
Mike. Yeah,
Sunday
thank you.
Yes.
soon.
Yeah.
And I want to say
And it's an
your
honor to have you participate.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was going to say your research is really interesting. You research, where did he go? You research the climate change. You research that area. You research what happened there. This is something we'd like to know. It's hard for us to imagine what the Ice Age was like. And what was there. So this is something that you've researched deeply and alongside with the cultures there, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the whole concept of the origins of shamanism itself
Yeah.
coming from Siberia. And
Yeah, but I
how-
mean, what was the landscape like? What was
Yeah.
what did they have
Right,
there? It's
right.
hard for us to imagine. But I think if we could understand that in the context of the cultural, it helps illuminate
the
those
ritual. Yeah.
as well. So
Yeah.
we look forward to.
Well, again, thank you.
As far as I'm concerned, I will be happy to make some talk presentation in the future about our Siberian research as well as the West Canadian studies. So
Thank you.
You're on. It's a deal.
Yeah, and you
organize it.
you
Yes.
don't hesitate to see how the Gravettian culture there could have migrated into North America during the Ice Age. That is a reasonable
Okay.
hypothesis to you.
Yeah.
And you're on the
Okay,
ground
thank
there.
you.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, listen, we need to come to an end and there's no way to consolidate this profound conversation in the full spectrum of what we're talking about here. But I am so grateful to have you here to follow up and to kind of put it in perspective, because there's always been this limitation based on the fact that all of the land bridge activity was prior to ice. I mean, or after the ice melt. I'm sorry, after the ice melt. So the idea that no, the land bridge existed prior to that, and why couldn't they have traveled? And you've brought that to light as well. Anyway, this whole thing has been really, I think it's mind blowing.
It's fun to see a new theory being presented
Right.
with so much evidence behind it that also illuminates
Yeah.
the culture, that brings it more alive and immediate to us.
Right.
And as James Harrod, who by the way will be joining us again on March 26th on Ice Age Art of Europe, when it looks like there was a global civilization with so much reach, so much endurance, so much resonance in
Yeah.
how we think today, symbology, cosmologically, ideology, it resonates with us today. And it really demonstrates how we're one family of man. We're so interconnected. And it makes me sad that our indigenous roots were cut off so early
Right.
for me, for us, so many of us, but that we can retrieve them again. We can go back and decode these cultures. We can understand what they were about and how they practice, what their ritual burials were, for example, what their symbology was, what their art was about, how they
rituals in
related
general,
to their
yeah.
environment, their earth, and their understanding of their place in it. It illuminates us today and the challenges that we have. And it would help us to write our relationship again
So,
with our whole story.
Absolutely.
Right? It tells a new story that we need to listen to.
well, Professor.
What would you like to say by way of conclusion?
Well, I'm going to say that I've learned a lot by looking at organic artifacts, but now I'm returning to the stone artifacts to see what I had overlooked.
Mhm.
And I'm going to end by showing this object,
Ooh.
which, as you may plainly see, has the shape, the head, and the outline of a mammoth
Yeah.
but it's made on a prismatic blade core, which is a pedestrian artifact of Upper Paleolithic peoples. And we've long known about these in the New World, but we never saw, this is a deliberately flaked and shaped head, believe me. And so now we have a proboscidean, a mammoth, and this came from the Lower Blue Lick site recently. And I'll end with showing, I'm back to my stone tools again.
Yeah.
You've come full circle.
Really
Yeah.
good.
I've come full circle, yes.
And when
Oh.
you recounted your life story, it was very interesting to see that you were destined to study all this. This stuff came to you. You didn't have to look far at such a young age to
Yeah.
find your life's path, did
Right.
you?
Every day, there's been this challenge presented to me, and I'm beholden to other people. The Lower Blue Lick site, and the sled there
Right.
was brought to my attention by one of my members of the American Society of Amateur Archaeology, from lifetime member, in fact, and his name is Dennis Vesper. And he's a Kentuckian like me, or a colonel rather, in Kentucky like me. And he went to the museum at the Blue Licks Battlefield Museum and saw this sled runner. And he had grown familiar with sled runners from the sled runners of the Hiscock site, made of the mastodon tusks. And he said, Mike, we have maybe another sled runner. So we finally got to see it when the COVID restrictions were lifted, and mercy, it was a sled runner. And then we found the entire rest of the sled in storage in the basement, where it had been for more than 100 years.
Oh,
So that's the lesson to be learned, that you've got to look into the basements of museums, look everywhere, look wherever you need to find more data that is relevant to the data you already know about.
yeah. And
And
fortunate.
expand the picture.
Yeah.
Put more pieces of the puzzle on the table so that new patterns emerge, new insights. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's fortunate to have a calling that you've recognized, because there is no retirement for those people who have a calling. And so I know you'll be doing this until you dance off the planet. Keep pushing forward with greater research and understanding, and bringing us up to date with your findings. And want to thank you so much for being here today and all that you've brought to this discussion.
I'll be doing this, my calling, until I too enter the archaeological record.
And thank you for bringing so many of your colleagues with you. From Ellen Day, who I really wanted to hear from, Sam Briggs, and Professor Geary, and Tyler Chase,
Yeah.
and of course, James Harrod. Wow.
What a
Thank
community.
And
you.
of course, this presentation will be on YouTube, so others who can't join us today will get a chance.
Yes,
to join us.
that's
Well,
true.
Yeah, I think,
I don't know if you have time, but I fixed it.
oh,
there you go.
yes,
Go ahead.
please. Yeah.
So my main, I'm kind of no one. I've just been searching for artifacts my whole life, and I live in Powhatan, Virginia. Grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I started finding arrowheads and Clovis things around here since I've lived in Powhatan, and then I started finding other things, other carvings, and other things that I think are of importance. And I was just wondering if there's any other searches going on in like the South, where I am in Virginia.
Yeah, good question. And please talk about your amateur society where you invite all of us to participate. That's exciting.
I
Yes.
actually, I'm a moderator on a page called The Other Artifacts. I've been doing this for a few years now. I've been doing it for 15 years, but I just started getting on a page, and also not just the arrowheads. I started finding other art, carved art, and
Interesting.
You're open to the possibilities.
Yeah.
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 And I hear from people like you regularly, and some important things come to hand because of it. So I encourage you to email me and send me photographs of these things, and I'll always return your communications. That's what I've learned to do. I can see so far because I stand on the shoulders of myriad people like you. They're members of my society. American Society for Amateur Archaeology, which has existed since 1994. And a lot of people have gone to the Happy Hunting Ground who belong to that society. But you know what? We still have room for new members, and I always like getting communications from people people who make discoveries like you.
Well, it's very a hard subject to broach, because sometimes people don't know where the line is of something that's worked, a tool that's maybe put art on, or something that's actually worked. There definitely is a line, and we get a lot of strife about that. We're seeing things, and I really do have a lot of artifacts here that are suggesting that, I mean, they were carving mammoths, they were carving elephants and trunks and things in their tools.
Your same caveats, though, apply to all of old world art, prehistoric art.
Yeah.
And remember, the highest form of art is to see the form in the object and then to
Yes.
bring it out.
Beautifully said.
And that's called
Very
found
minimal
art.
Yes.
And that means you really have to be thinking the right thoughts. And and I hope you are. And if you err a little bit, going too far, you might say, don't worry about it. Don't sweat it.
It's okay to ask questions.
Yeah,
Be open
it
to
is.
whatever the answers might be.
It is.
It's okay to
Thank you,
ask
Kelly, for
questions.
getting on at the last minute.
Yeah, appreciate
great.
this. I know you want to be in touch and send Gramly some
Yeah.
images of what you think you find,
Yeah,
because he's open to that. I appreciate that amateurs are let in brought to the table in this way. I remember
you.
talking
My
to
neighbor decided to blow their leaves.
astronomer who was saying many of the discoveries in astronomy are made by amateur astronomers because there's so many of them looking up at the sky
Right.
and covering all quarters of the sky.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's something I'm also
thank
studying,
you.
is some of the shapes and the constellations that we were
Yeah.
talking about with James Harrod. There's just a lot of connections, and there's just a fine line of people saying, you
And
know?
certainly our ancestors were watching the
And-
skies, right? That was the screen that they were most tuned to on a nightly basis. So,
and
indeed.
your enthusiasm isn't contagious, so keep going. That's wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to see what you're talking about too.
All right.
So,
Well, thank you.
Whoa, what a
And-
marathon
yeah,
conversation. I
yeah,
appreciate
exactly.
this. So,
Yeah.
good.
Well, I guess
And I need to get a
Dr.
diagram.
Gramly,
I'm gonna
thank
get
you
a
so
little
much.
tiara.
What
Listen, thank you
Yeah.
for a wonderful session, the opportunity for me to make presentations from my perspective and to listen to and meet other people. I just can't express, how the wonderful feeling I have right now. But I'll say goodbye to you today,
Yeah.
and we'll meet again.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I look forward to talking to your colleagues, and thank you for
Thank you,
pushing
Mike.
the
Thanks.